In exactly 17 heart-stopping seconds, the air inside a live Capitol hearing snapped like a wire about to explode. Marjorie Taylor Greene slammed her fist, eyes blazing, and spat at Jasmine Crockett. "Low IQ, bitch!" The chamber froze. Millions of Americans held their breath, and the nation teetered on the edge of chaos. What could Jasmine unleash in that silence so devastating it would flip the entire country against her attacker? Under the scorching lights of the Capitol hearing chamber, the red live sign flickered on like a warning siren. Every lens turned, every microphone sharpened, capturing the first breath of the night. Across America, living rooms, diners, and crowded bars went silent, waiting for something they could feel was about to explode. Jasmine Crockett sat poised at the long table, her midnight blue blazer gleaming under the cameras. She looked calm but not distant. Her presence commanded attention the way a trial lawyer commands a jury. For those who knew her, she wasn't just a politician. She was a fighter who had carried entire communities on her back through the courts. Every eye could sense it. This woman wasn't about to bend. On the opposite end, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned forward like a spark about to jump. Her hands tapped impatiently on the polished desk, her jaw tight, eyes scanning the audience like a showman searching for a stage cue. To her supporters, she was fearless. To her enemies, reckless. Either way, everyone knew one thing. She wasn't here to debate policy. She was here to ignite chaos. The room itself carried the tension of a battlefield. Journalists in the gallery whispered bets on how long it would take for MTG to detonate. Staffers sat stiff, notebooks clutched, afraid to breathe too loudly. Even Rachel Maddow, steady as stone at the moderator's seat, glanced between the two women like someone holding a match over gasoline. The air tightened, thick enough to taste. Every pause seemed dangerous. Every glance loaded like a weapon. America wasn't watching just another hearing. They were watching the spark of something bigger, something that could ripple across the nation in seconds. Then the camera zoomed closer, the microphones drew in, and the silence stretched one heartbeat too long. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. When the red light blinked live, nobody knew the first word out of MTG's mouth would ignite a firestorm. The words were flowing from Jasmine, smooth, steady, deliberate. She was laying out her case with the calm of a seasoned lawyer when suddenly it happened. Marjorie Taylor Greene slammed forward, her voice cutting the air like a whip. "You're nothing but a low IQ bitch!" The sound cracked through the chamber. A hush swept across the room, heavy enough to crush even the air. The chamber froze, as though marble walls themselves refused to breathe. Even the cameras seemed to jolt, lenses zooming closer as if they, too, couldn't believe what they just caught live. Rachel Maddow's lips parted, but no words came. For a split second, even the unshakable moderator froze, her hand hovering above the notes. The silence turned electric, heavy enough to press on every chest. In the audience, outrage clashed with smirks, as whispers rippled like a storm. Phones came up, recording, knowing the clip was already worth millions of views. Half horrified, half entertained, the crowd fed on the chaos. And there sat Jasmine, not a twitch, not a blink. Her eyes locked ahead, unflinching, the kind of stare that makes silence louder than screaming. The camera zoomed closer, framing her face like a portrait. America was staring back into her eyes now, waiting to see if she would break. MTG wasn't done. She leaned across the table, lips curled, enjoying the gasps she had created. Her words dripped with venom. "That's what you are, Crockett. Low IQ, nothing more." She knew the insult would echo across headlines. She wanted it burned into memory. Reporters in the gallery bent forward, pens scribbling furiously, eyes wide. This wasn't politics anymore. It was blood sport. Every second of silence felt like a string pulled tighter, ready to snap. The insult hung in the air, thick and ugly, demanding a response. Jasmine's hand rested on the desk, still, firm. The only movement was the slow rise of her chest as she drew in a steady breath. To the audience, it looked like nothing. But to those who knew her, it was the calm before thunder, the moment a blade sharpens before striking. Millions of viewers leaned forward in their homes. Veterans, mothers, teachers, workers, everyday Americans who had felt the sting of being dismissed, insulted, silenced. They weren't just watching Jasmine. They were with her, holding their breath as though the insult had been hurled at them. The chamber waited. The nation waited. Even MTG, for all her bluster, paused, almost daring Jasmine to react. The silence grew so heavy it pressed against every chest, making it hard to breathe. And then came the hook, whispered not in words but in the weight of anticipation. What does one woman say in the silence after being humiliated on national television? The silence pressed against the chamber like a weight. Cameras locked on Jasmine's face, waiting for a crack, a flinch, a burst of rage. Instead, she leaned into the microphone. Her voice came low, steady, clear. "Low IQ, bitch." The words rolled back across the room, not as an echo of weakness, but as a weapon turned in her hands. She didn't shout them. She owned them. And suddenly the insult that had just exploded like shrapnel now felt small, almost childish. The audience shifted uneasily, realizing something had flipped. Her eyes swept across the room, past MTG's glare, into the sea of faces. "Is that what you call me?" she asked, then paused, her voice cutting sharper. "Or is that what you call the mothers who work 2 jobs and still tuck their kids in at night? The teachers who buy supplies with their own paychecks? The workers who break their backs just to put food on the table?" A ripple moved through the gallery. Whispers turned into gasps. A single mother in the front row wiped her eyes, unable to hide the sting of recognition. For her, it wasn't just words. It was her life being defended in real time. Phones trembled as people in the audience tried to record, sensing this was bigger than politics. MTG smirked, but the fire in her eyes flickered. She hadn't expected this. She wanted a fight, claws and shouting, chaos to feed her narrative. But Jasmine refused to play the role of victim or aggressor. She was rewriting the scene, brick by brick, while the cameras captured every breath. Jasmine leaned closer, her hand pressing firmly against the desk. "If I'm a bitch for standing up for them, then so be it. But don't mistake compassion for weakness. Don't mistake intelligence for silence. And don't mistake me for someone you can scare into shrinking." The chamber was electric. Some audience members clapped before quickly covering their mouths, unsure if they were allowed to break protocol. The tension cracked just enough to let the sound of human emotion bleed through. It wasn't polished politics. It was raw, unfiltered truth. Rachel Maddow's eyes widened, her pen frozen above her notes. Even the moderator knew she was watching a line being drawn, one that would live far beyond tonight. Every network, every outlet, every phone streaming this broadcast would carry Jasmine's words into millions of homes before the hour was over. The insult still lingered in the air, but it no longer belonged to MTG. Jasmine had snatched it, reshaped it, and now held it like a banner above her head. She wasn't just defending herself. She was lifting everyone who had ever been demeaned, mocked, or dismissed. The audience leaned forward, breathless. Viewers at home sat stunned. A single question now hung over the broadcast like a storm cloud ready to break. Could an insult meant to destroy her instead crown her the voice of millions? The clip spread like fire, leaping from phone to phone, city to city. In kitchens, mothers dropped their spoons mid-stir, their eyes locked on the words flashing across the screen. In noisy bars, the music dimmed as the video replayed on loop, every ear straining to hear Jasmine's calm defiance. At a veterans hall in Ohio, the room went silent. Old soldiers, their hands rough and scarred, stared hard at the screen. One muttered, "You don't talk to a woman like that. Not in my country." Heads nodded all around him, heavy with agreement. On social media, the storm was instant. "Stand with Jasmine" shot to the top of Twitter in minutes. Right behind it, MTG insults surged, filled with outrage, memes, and raw disbelief. The nation wasn't waiting for newspapers. It was unfolding online in real time. In Detroit, a single mother replayed the clip over and over. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "She spoke for me." In Dallas, a veteran slammed his fist on a bar counter. His voice shook. "She's low IQ? She's smarter than the whole lot of them." Churches joined the wave. In Georgia, a pastor showed the clip to his evening congregation. The room gasped, then murmured, voices blending into a solemn amen. To them, Jasmine wasn't just a congresswoman. She was standing in for every person ever belittled and told they weren't enough. Newsrooms scrambled to catch up. Anchors debated live, their faces tight with urgency. Some praised Jasmine's restraint as brilliance. Others tried to soften MTG's outburst, calling it straight talk. But outside the polished studios, Americans weren't theorizing. They were taking sides. On TikTok, teens remixed Jasmine's words into defiant edits. On Facebook, grandparents shared the video with captions like, "Finally, someone stood tall." The audience was no longer passive, it was part of the fight, voices echoing through the digital storm. By midnight, millions had watched, shared, and argued. The insult was no longer one woman's burden, it was America's question. And it pressed against every living room, every screen, every heart. Would America stand by Jasmine or watch her be torn apart in real time? Phones lit up across the country, one voice after another breaking through the noise. A nurse from Detroit filmed herself still in scrubs, her badge hanging loosely around her neck. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but her voice burned with fire. "Don't you dare call her low IQ," she said, staring straight into the camera. "That woman stood taller than anyone in that room tonight. She stood for us." Her clip hit 1 million views before the morning sun. In Texas, a veteran sat at his kitchen table, the American flag folded neatly in a frame above him. He pressed record, his hand steady despite the tremor in his voice. "I've buried brothers for this country," he said, "and I've spent my life fighting for dignity. Jasmine Crockett carries that flag now. She's not low IQ. She's the voice of every soldier who came home and wondered if their sacrifice mattered." His words cut through the noise like a bugle call. A teacher in Georgia filmed her response in a cluttered classroom. Stacks of graded papers and posters of presidents lined the walls behind her. She looked tired, her voice low but unwavering. "She defended us," she whispered. "We stretch our paychecks to buy supplies. We show up every day for kids who deserve better." And when Greene mocked her, she mocked all of us. Jasmine spoke our truth. Parents and educators shared it endlessly, proud to see someone finally stand in their place. By dawn, the internet was a flood of solidarity. Rallies sprouted overnight in small towns and major cities alike. Crowds carried handmade signs, "Dignity is power," and "Stand with Jasmine." Car horns blared in support, chants of "We are with you," echoing through downtown streets. The energy was raw, the kind that turns into movements, not just moments. The emotional crescendo came quietly from a grandmother in Ohio. Sitting on her porch in the soft glow of a porch light, she held her phone close. Her voice trembled but carried the weight of generations. "She spoke for us without yelling," she said, tears glistening on her cheeks. "That's the strength I want my grandchildren to remember." Her words spread just as fast as the fiery speeches, because they rang with truth no insult could erase. News anchors scrambled, trying to control the story, but it was already gone. The narrative belonged to the people now, the mothers, the veterans, the teachers, the grandmothers. Every clip, every share, every chant wove Jasmine's defiance into the fabric of something much bigger. The insult meant to diminish her was stitching millions together instead. And as dawn broke across America, a single question echoed louder than all the hashtags, louder than all the debates. What happens when insults meant to shame one woman awaken a nation? By morning, the nation was still buzzing, waiting for Jasmine's answer. Would she strike back? Would she call names of her own? Instead, a simple post appeared on her official account. The tone was calm. The words were deliberate. She didn't repeat the insult. She reframed it. "When Marjorie Taylor Greene called me low IQ and bitch, she wasn't just speaking to me," Jasmine wrote. "She was speaking to every mother working 2 jobs, every teacher who buys supplies with their paycheck, every minority who has been told they are less. I will never apologize for standing with them." The message spread instantly. Screens lit up as people read the words aloud to family and friends. It wasn't fiery, but it cut deep. She didn't need rage. She had dignity. And dignity, in the rawest moment of humiliation, looked like strength. Clips of her post spread across television. Pundits replayed the words, their voices laced with surprise. "She didn't take the bait," one anchor admitted. "She lifted the insult and turned it into a shield." To millions of viewers, it felt like the moment the fight shifted. Jasmine wasn't just defending herself, she was defending them. Meanwhile, MTG went the opposite direction. Her campaign blasted out an email before sunrise. The subject line screamed, "I'll never back down to that low IQ bitch." The letter begged for donations, dripping with anger and defiance. The words were repeated again and again, her tone sharper, more vicious than the night before. To her base, it was red meat. To everyone else, it felt desperate. Commentators shook their heads at the email, saying it read less like leadership and more like a tantrum. Screenshots circulated online with captions like, "This is what power in panic looks like." By noon, the contrast was stark. On one side, Jasmine's quiet dignity. On the other, Greene's rage weaponized for cash. It wasn't just a fight between two women anymore. It was a collision between two Americas, one that shouts and one that stands. The insult had left the chamber and taken on a new life. It wasn't just words anymore. It was a political weapon. And as the country split screens between Jasmine's post and MTG's email, the question grew sharper by the hour. Who would it wound more? The House chamber was already thick with tension, but when Marjorie Taylor Greene rose from her seat, the energy shifted. Reporters in the gallery sat straighter, pens ready. They knew what was coming. Greene lived for this kind of spotlight, lived for the moment when insults became ammunition. She didn't waste time. Her voice cracked like a whip across the hall. "Yes, I called her a low IQ bitch," she shouted, eyes locked on Jasmine. "And I'll say it again, because it's the truth." Her words bounced off the marble walls, louder than debate, heavier than policy. This wasn't legislation. This was theater. From the back row, Lauren Boebert erupted into applause, clapping wildly, grinning as if she had scored a touchdown. Jim Jordan leaned back in his chair, smirk curling at the corner of his mouth, arms folded with satisfaction. He wasn't laughing at the words. He was laughing at the spectacle. Greene had turned the floor of Congress into her personal stage, and they were her cheering section. The cameras captured every second. Clips shot straight to conservative media, where pundits praised her bravery and straight talk. GOP donors smiled in background interviews, claiming she had guts. The money rolled in, the applause of her base roaring even louder than the jeers echoing inside the chamber. Cruelty was the point, and Greene wielded it like a blade. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She sat steady at her desk, fingers interlaced, eyes unblinking. To her, this wasn't a fight worth shouting over. She knew the trap. If she yelled back, the clip would be weaponized, edited, blasted across feeds as two angry women brawling in Congress. That wasn't the story she wanted written. Greene leaned forward again, doubling down. "If fighting for America makes me mean, then fine. I'll wear it with pride." Her voice cracked, desperate to drown the murmurs of discomfort around the chamber. Her supporters howled, pounding their desks, reveling in the chaos. It felt less like a floor debate and more like a high school pep rally gone rabid. Journalists scribbled furiously, some exchanging glances. They already saw the headline, "Greene doubles down on slur." But others looked to Jasmine, waiting for the counter, waiting for the quiet fire she was known for. The restraint was almost louder than Greene's shouting, and the cameras began to linger on her face. For viewers at home, the contrast was impossible to miss. One woman thrived on insults. The other sat unmoved, a storm contained behind steady eyes. It was chaos versus composure, and the question hung over the entire chamber, like smoke from a fresh fire. How do you fight someone who thrives on chaos? The roar of Greene's words still lingered in the chamber when Jasmine finally moved. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at Greene. Instead, she stood slowly, her chair sliding back with a sharp scrape that cut through the noise. The room hushed, sensing something different was about to happen. Jasmine placed a thick dossier on the desk in front of her. The cover caught the light as she opened it, her hands steady, her breathing calm. Cameras zoomed in, hungry to see what weapon she would pull. It wasn't anger, it was paper, it was proof. Her voice carried evenly, filling the chamber without force. "Here," she said, "is my record." She read from a page. Legal briefs where she had defended veterans cheated out of their benefits. She read testimonies of children whose voices she had carried into the courtroom. She listed cases where minorities had been silenced, and she had stood in their place. Each word landed heavy, undeniable. Greene scoffed from across the room, rolling her eyes, mocking under her breath. She wanted chaos. She wanted sparks. But Jasmine gave her none of it. She answered venom with facts, cruelty with compassion. The contrast was painful to watch. One woman throwing insults, the other building truth brick by brick. The chamber began to shift. Staffers who had been smirking now stared at the desk. Lawmakers leaned forward, suddenly quiet. The weight of Jasmine's words pressed down harder than any shouted insult. Her silence between lines felt like thunder, each pause daring the room to measure the difference between dignity and derision. She read one more passage. "This is what I've done with my so-called low IQ," she said, her eyes sweeping the chamber. "I've fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and I'll keep doing it." The words weren't flashy, but they landed like a hammer. Reporters scribbled faster, realizing this was the story. Not a screaming match, but a masterclass in control. Jasmine had flipped the script. She didn't need to fight fire with fire. She lit her own flame, steady and strong, and let the truth burn brighter than Greene's noise. The audience could feel it too. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber, as if everyone realized the spectacle had turned against its own performer. Greene's laughter rang hollow. Jasmine's voice stood tall. And in the silence that followed, the question hung heavy. Could silence and truth cut deeper than shouting? The chamber was silent as Jasmine closed the dossier. Pages that had carried lives, struggles, and victories now lay still on the desk. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She turned her gaze toward Greene, steady and unshaken. Her hand lifted, finger pointing across the room. Her voice cut clean through the air. If intelligence is measured by compassion, then America has its answer. No theatrics, no rage, just the kind of clarity that makes words feel heavier than stone. The chamber exploded. Applause burst like thunder rolling through marble halls. Lawmakers stood. Staffers clapped despite themselves. Even those who had mocked her earlier couldn't escape the pull of the moment. The air shifted, from tension to release, from spectacle to respect. Cameras snapped like gunfire, catching every angle. The shot that mattered most zoomed in on Greene. Her smile cracked, just enough to show the strain beneath. She forced a laugh, but her eyes betrayed her. For the first time that night, the predator looked cornered. Jasmine didn't celebrate. She didn't grin. She simply lowered her hand and let the room roar around her. That restraint made the applause even louder. She had won not by shouting, but by standing taller than the insult meant to drag her down. Reporters scribbled furiously, some shaking their heads. They knew they'd just witnessed a pivot point, something that would live on reels, replayed in classrooms and campaign ads for years to come. This wasn't just politics. It was history written live. Greene sat rigid, her supporters trying to clap along, but the sound fell flat. The performance had turned against her, leaving her with nothing but the echo of her own cruelty. Jasmine had claimed the floor, the room, the story, and yet beyond the applause, the real fight waited, because the chamber was only one stage. Outside, millions of Americans were still watching, still arguing, still deciding. The battle lines stretched far past marble walls and television cameras. As the cheers faded into echoes, one truth settled heavy in the air. The chamber may have belonged to Jasmine tonight, but the nation itself would be the final battleground. The battle spilled from Congress into every living room. On Fox News, the clip froze on Jasmine, pointing at Greene. "Look at the anger," a host sneered. "This is the radical left on display." Viewers were told it was rage, not restraint. MSNBC carried a different headline: Strength in Silence. They replayed Jasmine's calm words without interruption. "This is leadership," one host said firmly. "Measured, dignified, unflinching." Their tone was reverent, almost protective. CNN went wall to wall, the clip looping like breaking news. Analysts filled panels, voices overlapping in heated debate. "Was this un-American?" one asked, "or the most patriotic act we've seen in years?" The argument bled into every hour. Talk radio seized the moment. Conservative hosts mocked Jasmine, replaying Greene's insult with laugh tracks. Progressive stations countered, airing Jasmine's full speech. Callers flooded the lines, angry, proud, emotional. The divide pulsed through every frequency. Online, the fight was even louder. Twitter exploded with hashtags. Stand with Jasmine climbed past 1 million mentions. MTG insults trailed close behind, filled with memes and fury. Social media wasn't just watching, it was choosing sides. TikTok teens spliced Jasmine's line. If intelligence is measured by compassion, then America has its answer. Into clips with swelling music. On Facebook, grandparents shared the same moment with captions like, "Finally, someone stood tall for us." The clip crossed generations in a single night. By evening, the country was split between two stories. To some, Jasmine was the villain, angry and hostile. To others, she was the symbol of dignity, a voice refusing to be silenced. The truth fractured into pieces, each outlet bending it to fit their agenda. And yet, beyond all the spin, one fact remained undeniable. Jasmine's words had cut through the noise. They forced America to look at itself, at the insults it tolerated, at the values it claimed to hold. The applause in the chamber was over. The headlines had been written. But the real question lingered in every diner, every living room, every phone screen. In a nation so divided, whose version of truth would prevail? The noise from the media storm hadn't faded when the letters began to arrive. Thick envelopes, handwritten notes, emails pouring in by the thousands. Some were shaky with age, others scrawled in a rush, but all carried the same message. Thank you. Jasmine read them late into the night, her desk covered in Voices of America. One came from Arizona, written in Spanish, translated in neat handwriting by a daughter. A Latina mother told of working double shifts in a hotel, cleaning rooms while her children waited at home. "When Greene insulted you," she wrote, "she insulted women like me. But you answered for us." Jasmine traced the words with her finger, her throat tightening. From Georgia, a black veteran sent his story. He described fighting overseas, only to return home and be treated like he didn't matter. "I wore this country's uniform," he said, "but in that chamber, you wore our pain with pride. Don't let them silence you." The weight of his words pressed heavy on Jasmine's chest. The letters grew more personal. A young teacher wrote about buying pencils and notebooks out of her own paycheck. A single father admitted he was scared every day he wouldn't make rent. Each story wasn't just about survival, it was about dignity. They saw in Jasmine's defiance a reflection of their own quiet battles. At a press conference, she began reading them aloud. Her voice wavered as she shared the grandmother's words. "She spoke for us without yelling." Reporters stopped scribbling. Cameras zoomed closer, catching the glint of tears in her eyes. It was no longer politics. It was testimony. Crowds outside listened in silence, some wiping their own eyes as they heard their struggles echoed back from the podium. For a moment, the fight with Greene disappeared. What remained were the voices of ordinary people rising through Jasmine. Her restraint, her defiance, had cracked something open. The applause that followed wasn't the roar of partisanship. It was the sound of a nation recognizing itself in one woman's stand. And as Jasmine folded the last letter back into its envelope, one thought echoed louder than the noise of pundits and cameras. Was she becoming more than a politician? Was she becoming a symbol? The morning after the letters, the streets outside the Capitol began to fill. At first it was a few dozen, then a few hundred. By noon, thousands moved as one, their voices carrying in the cold air. Banners rose above the crowd, like sails in a storm. "Dignity is power. Stand with Jasmine." The march was quiet but strong. No fists thrown, no chaos, just footsteps beating steady against the pavement. Teachers in worn coats walked shoulder to shoulder with nurses in scrubs. Veterans carried flags folded neatly against their chests. Mothers pushed strollers, children holding cardboard signs painted in crayon. The sight was ordinary and yet extraordinary, like the country itself was stepping into the frame. Reporters swarmed, cameras capturing every angle. The crowd didn't chant angrily. They hummed, they prayed. They moved like a river flowing towards something greater. And at the heart of it, stepping forward without fanfare, was Jasmine. She said nothing. She didn't need to. She walked silently, arm in arm with a teacher on one side and a veteran on the other. Her presence turned the march into something symbolic, something alive. Every click of the cameras captured an image that felt more powerful than any speech, her quiet defiance, steady as stone. Online, Greene mocked them. She fired off tweets dripping with sarcasm, a parade of losers holding hands. How cute. She posted memes, laughing at the signs, ridiculing the march as pathetic. Her words burned bright for her base, but outside that bubble, they felt cheap, like a match flicked in the wind. Because while Greene mocked, the image of Jasmine walking through the march spread everywhere. News outlets carried it, social media looped it. People called it the walk heard around the world. The still photos looked like paintings, a congresswoman walking with her people, unguarded, unafraid. The crowd kept growing. What began at the Capitol stretched across states, marches in Atlanta, Detroit, Phoenix, Dallas, all with the same banner, all carrying the same message. Dignity, not insults, was the new fire. And as the sun dipped behind the Capitol dome, one question burned hotter than Greene's tweets. Would her insults finally backfire, turning her fury into Jasmine's firepower? The stage burned under the lights. Another debate, another night broadcast live to millions of homes. The air buzzed with a single question. Would Marjorie Taylor Greene hurl the insult again? She leaned into the mic, her voice sharp. She's still the same low IQ. But the words never landed. The audience burst out laughing, a wave of chuckles crashing through the chamber. It wasn't the shocked gasp of before. This was different. It was mocking, dismissive, stripping the venom from Greene's words and leaving them empty. She blinked, caught mid-sentence, her line crumbling under the weight of ridicule. Greene pressed on, her tone growing harsher. But the harder she pushed, the louder the laughter became. What once hit like a slap now sounded like a punchline. Her smirk faltered, her shoulders stiffened. The insult had turned against her. Across the stage, Jasmine stayed still. She didn't flinch, didn't rush. She let the moment breathe, let the laughter carry, then slowly rose to her feet. Every camera swung to her, every pair of eyes fixed on what she would or wouldn't say. She said nothing at first, just stood there, hands resting calmly on the desk. The silence stretched, long and deliberate, drawing the room tighter and tighter. Viewers at home leaned forward, caught in the pause, sensing power in the restraint. The contrast was undeniable. One woman scrambling for outrage, drowning in her own noise. The other commanding the stage without a single word, letting silence speak where shouting failed. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Greene tried to chuckle, tried to mask her stumble with bravado. But the cracks showed. Her eyes darted, her smile stiff. She wasn't in control anymore. She was standing in the shadow of her own failed performance. And as Jasmine stood tall in that heavy silence, the question echoed through every living room in America. What happens when cruelty no longer shocks, but embarrasses the one who speaks it? The room was still vibrating with laughter when Jasmine lifted her chin. She didn't look at Greene. She didn't look at the lawmakers frozen in their seats. She turned straight to the camera, her gaze locked on millions of eyes watching from living rooms across America. Her voice rang steady, each word sharp as glass. If fighting for justice makes me a bitch in their eyes, then I'll be the proudest one in America. Because dignity is not an insult, it's our weapon. For a split second, silence held. Then the chamber erupted like a dam breaking. Applause thundered against the marble walls, lawmakers rising to their feet, staffers clapping openly, the audience roaring as though history had just been made. It wasn't polite applause. It was the sound of release, of people who had been waiting for someone to say exactly that. Greene sat frozen. Her glare could cut steel, but the moment wasn't hers anymore. The smirk she'd worn all night had vanished, replaced by a tight jaw and eyes that darted like a cornered animal. Cameras caught every second, zooming in on her silence. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't need to. She stood firm, letting the ovation wash over her, her hands steady on the podium. She looked like a figure carved in stone, calm in the storm, a leader who had taken the ugliest insult and turned it into a banner of strength. Reporters scribbled wildly, Anchors in the back whispered into earpieces. Producers barked to roll the clip again. The line was already headed for history books, already climbing into hashtags and headlines. Across the country, people in bars, churches, kitchens stood and clapped along with the crowd they saw on screen. The balance had flipped. Cruelty had tried to write the story, but dignity had seized the pen. Jasmine Crockett had rewritten the ending in front of millions, and even her enemies knew it. As the applause finally began to settle, the question lingered in the charged air, heavy and unshakable. Would this moment mark the end of politics by insult? The applause still echoed in the chamber when the montage began to take shape across America. In living rooms, families leaned into each other, hugging as if Jasmine's words had been spoken for them alone. In veterans' halls, old soldiers nodded in silence, their eyes glassy but proud. In kitchens, mothers wiped tears with the backs of their hands, whispering to their children that this moment was what strength looked like. Clips poured in, stitched together by the speed of the internet. A teenager in Detroit replayed the line on TikTok, her voice trembling as she mouthed the words, "Dignity is our weapon." A grandmother in Arizona shared the clip on Facebook, typing only, "Finally." At a bar in Georgia, strangers clinked glasses to the screen, cheering not for politics but for a woman who had turned an insult into a shield. The reactions were raw, unscripted, alive. Some were loud, cheers, shouts, chants in the street. Others were quiet, heads bowed, hands clasped, hearts stirred. It wasn't about party lines anymore. It was about recognition, about seeing in Jasmine's defiance a reflection of their own buried dignity. Narrators on late-night shows called it a turning point. Columnists wrote that she had given America something it rarely received, a mirror, not polished, not pretty, but clear enough to force a reckoning. Greene had tried to brand her with cruelty, but instead had revealed a truth about the country itself. Jasmine didn't just answer an insult, she transformed it. She showed that words meant to tear down could be forged into something unbreakable. She gave people who had been dismissed, mocked, or ignored a reason to stand a little taller. The screen faded to her image, silent but resolute, walking out of the chamber as the ovation thundered behind her. Over it, the narration closed, soft but unshakable. Sometimes the loudest answer isn't rage, it's dignity, and dignity, once awakened, cannot be silenced. And in that silence, the story didn't end. It began to spread, through comments, shares, debates, through whispers and shouts alike. Because America had been given not just a moment, but a message, one that demanded to be remembered. Jasmine's final stand showed that even in a world addicted to noise and cruelty, dignity can still disarm hate and unite people across every divide. For anyone who has ever been mocked, dismissed, or told they weren't enough, her story is proof that grace under fire can turn an insult into power. And now ask yourself, when faced with your own moment of trial, will you let their words define you, or will you stand tall and let dignity speak for you? Dignity speaks louder than insult, and courage is what keeps a nation alive. If Jasmine's stand moved you, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit subscribe, like, and share so her voice can echo further, because every act of courage lights another spark in the dark. This story is created for inspiration and reflection. It does not represent any individual or organization. Viewer interpretation and discussion are encouraged, but final responsibility rests with each audience member. Now it's your turn. What do you believe defines true strength? Dignity, courage, or truth? Drop your answer below. I'll be reading your comments.